Well, it's 7:03. We'll go and get started tonight, and I hope we'll have a few more folks who jump in with us as we go. Um, but so this week we are ready for chapter 5. I hope all of you read. And so, if you did, what stood out to you maybe in this week's reading? As you were reading through this chapter, what kind of jumped out at you or maybe stood out or struck you a particular way?
Well, I like to start. I noticed it was mainly talking about teenagers, but I still like to, I guess, put it in my perspective, even though I don't have a teenager yet. So I just thought it was really helpful to think about some of the things that parents noted as problems as their kids were teenagers. Just like my kids are on top of me all the time, so it's hard for me to imagine the time when they're not going to want to be with me. But that's what a lot of these parents talked about when their kids reach teenager ages. And so I guess that just really struck me, just to try to fast forward and think of what it might be like a few years from now for me.
Yeah, so I was kind of in the same boat. In fact, as I was reading through this chapter, I told Karen earlier, I said, man, I really wish Robert and I had gotten together early enough in this process that if I was going to end up leading this, we could have swapped the order of chapters, because I would have felt much more comfortable with next week's chapter than this one, because of exactly the same kind of thing. Like, it's a little bit hard for me to kind of relate to. But I also had some of the same things and thoughts, and that it was helpful for me to see these things and begin thinking about them now. What else stood out to some of the rest of you?
Well, for me, we do have a teenager. And so, talking about communication and everything. So Braden says, well, it seems like, you know more about the kids and the kids talk to you more. And I'm like, well, it's not because they volunteer this information. I ask them about every single class, every single activity, lunch, who they sat with, what they talked about. I mean, I ask very specific details. And that's how, and then that kind of tends to lead to them talking more, but he doesn't just automatically just start talking about his day. So
Lane seems real thrilled by these questions, by the way.
And he'll start talking more and saying more after I kind of get everything going.
What else stood out to you, maybe in this week's reading? Anyone else have something that maybe just kind of hit you, or kind of made you think a little bit? So one of the things that stood out to me, and we'll kind of walk through the whole chapter here as we go tonight, but one of the things that stood out to me uh, was that kind of this overarching theme was that you need to put yourself into your kids' lives and meet them on their terms. Uh, and this makes sense, right? Because we do this with anyone else. Like, anytime we're building a relationship with someone, like, this is one of the first things you try to find some common ground. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Marion talk about, when someone shows up at church, he just kind of asks them about different things to try to see if maybe he can find some common ground to be able to relate to, or if he can't, maybe to point them to somebody at church who does. Like, oh, you work here, well, so and so works there too, or things like that, to kind of find some common ground. So we do this in lots of other relationships with our lives, and so it seems like it would be, like, it should be intuitive to think about with our kids, but even then, it's not always. I mean, again, I don't have teenagers yet, but just in general, uh, in interactions with Ben, there are things sometimes that he's interested in that I really just do not care for. Like, but he wants to talk about them. And sometimes it's not that I'm not into them, but I'm not interested in talking about them as much as he is. He really loves American Ninja Warrior. And he can tell you all about American Ninja Warrior and talk your ear off about it. But, you know, I think it's one of those things that really stood out to me was that to really have these relationships, it requires parents to take the initiative to get into their kids' lives rather than expecting their kids to volunteer this information. And you know, that was something that April was talking about just a minute ago. Lane here is not just waiting and chomping at the bit to get home and tell April all about his day in the way that like Ben is when I get out of the car to tell me about all the things he did with Julie today. Like, so, you know, certainly a big difference. Anything else that maybe stood out to you before we kind of start walking through some of this stuff?
Going back to what April said, I think it's encouraging. Lindsay and I do that with Collins and Hallie Lynn. And just a while ago, when Lindsay went and picked up the kids from Gina and Marion's, first thing I did was give the kids a hug and ask them about their day. And I'm very cognizant of doing that because I'm hopeful that when they are Lane's age, that they're more willing to talk to us and tell us more things. And I feel like Marion and Gina had that relationship with their kids, and I think it's a perfect example. They're on the call, of course, and they've been through this process. So I see how they talk to them now, and we talk to our kids like they're little adults, very purposely. So it's good, April, that you're doing that, and I think it gives us encouragement with young kiddos to know that we can still maintain that.
So, you know, this is one of the things that I think is that as I was reading through and trying to figure out what I wanted to, kind of how I wanted to talk tonight, knowing the breakdown of our class, one of the things that really stood out to me, and this kind of gets to some of what Julie said earlier, but a lot of the things that they talk about are geared for teenagers, but they are rooted in habits that will be a lot easier for teenagers if you start them early. You know, for instance, they talk, the one example was like the family game night. Well, if you've never had a game night as a family in your life, and all of a sudden you announce to your 15 and 16-year-olds that we're going to start having game nights on Saturday night, like, that's probably going to be a little weird in ways that, like, oh, our family has always had game night on Saturday. Of course, this is something we do. And so I think that's one of the things that, while this chapter is certainly more geared to teenagers and connecting parents with their teenagers, I think it is something that that a lot of the stuff will be easier to do if it started early. You know, one of the things that Luke told me several years ago, when I first read Sticky Faith, and he gave me the book, was, we do this with teenagers here at Farmington, and we have, but the time to really start working on these things for you and Karen is now, because it's a lot easier to put these things in younger and earlier than waiting until they are teenagers to then try to start doing these things. And so I hope that as we go tonight, we can see some practicality across the board. Well, as it kind of dives in, the book does what it normally does. It has these sticky concepts, the sticky findings, as they call them, and then these sticky ideas. And so, what are some of those findings that they talked about this week?
Family time together needs to be protected.
Okay, so yeah, that's one of the big ones. That this idea that family time needs to be protected. Uh, the reality is there are a lot of competing things vying for our kids' attention, and it only gets worse. I mean, I remember, I'm a year and a half older than my brother, but we were 2 years separated in school, and by the time both of us were in high school, like my senior year, uh, you know, he was playing baseball, and he had baseball, and I was in choir, and I was in scouts, and my parents are both working. And so there were times where, like, our family was literally going in four different directions, where we weren't getting home and all together till 8:30 at night. Um, but and so as kids get older, the things competing for their time only get greater. Um, and that becomes even more so when, like, kids start driving themselves, where all of a sudden it's you aren't even going to pick up your kid from take them to and from practice. Like, they're just going on their own, and they'll come home when practice is over. You don't even have those times of interaction. um, but so in the midst of all these things competing for our time and attention, we've got to be serious about family time, because it's not going to just happen organically. Dinner was always one of those things for my family growing up. uh, Karen and I to this day joke about it, because it is not uncommon, even still with no kids in the house, for dinner at my parents' house to not be until 8 or 8:30 at night. I blame it on the reality of all those years where it was 8:30 at night before all four of us finally were able to sit down. But we still tried as a family to always sit down to dinner together, even if that was late. But that was something that was important to my parents, that was part of our time as a family. Uh, Sometimes it might be that we had been at the ball field, and dinner was whatever my mom picked up on her way home from the ball field, but we tried to still have that time. Uh, I think one of the things they suggest is having a family calendar. Um, in a lot of ways, this is easier now than it ever has been. Uh, Karen and I have a family calendar right on our phones. We have Apple, our iCloud is a family account. And so we have a shared calendar. And so she can put things on the calendar, or I can put things on the calendar, and they go to both of our phones, and we know what's going on. And, if we are already at that stage of needing this, just accommodating 6-year-old baseball practice and games, then, like, I can only imagine what it's going to look like when we're accommodating 16-year-old baseball practice and games and all the other things that are going on. But so, like, that was one of the ideas they suggested. But there's absolutely this idea that if we care about our family time, we've got to find ways to protect it, whether that is through calendars or blocking off regularly scheduled things where it is a clear expectation of the family that this is something we do. Like, okay, we got a lot of things going on. We as a family will wait to eat dinner till you're home, or whatever that means. And, that might not always be possible, but family time is easy to be sacrificed. Now, I'm going to go a little bit on Jared here, and not so much in the book. I think we also need to be careful sometimes about how we treat family time. So I say this as someone whose responsibility it is to do a lot of things for our congregation. And one of the things I frequently hear is like, oh, we couldn't be there. We were having family time. Or, oh, well, I finally had a day off, so we spent the day together as a family. I believe very much that family time is important and critical for the faith building of our kids. But if we use family time as an excuse to not be involved in things that are spiritual in nature, that are connected to our broader church family, then we need to also ask ourselves what kind of example that is setting for our kids. I mean, if we say as a family, we're going to spend the day out at the park today, instead of, as a family, we're going to go to the day of service, what kind of message does that communicate to our kids? And so I think we need to be careful. I don't want this to sound like that I'm saying family time isn't important. I absolutely believe it is. But I do not believe it is mutually exclusive from church events. And I think it's a real dangerous thing for us if we use family time as an excuse not to be involved as a family with our church.
Jared, I absolutely agree, because there are things that me and Brandon cannot teach Lane or show him that a lot of the young male adults in the church can. I mean, he's making connections more than this. There's only so much parents can do, and he needs that interaction and that example from young male adults. That's not, so I very much agree with that.
So what are some of these other sticky findings? I'll get off my soapbox now. What are some of these other things they say are really important if we want to connect with our teenagers and kids?
Well, as I look at the page, not favoring one of your children over another one.
Yeah. So, this was something that was interesting to me. And so one of the things I tell my students all the time is that in history, perception is reality. And it's generally to talk about like why something happens the way it does that may not have actually been the case, but it doesn't matter whether or not the Spanish actually sunk the USS Maine in 1898. What matters is that public opinion believed they did, and there was a clamor for war. And so that was something that popped into my head as I was reading that section, because one of the things it said was, you may not think you are favoring one of your children over another, but that does not mean that they don't feel that way. And it doesn't matter whether you think you are or not. What matters is if your child feels that way. And so I think that's certainly something to be aware of, to think about how we are treating our children. Do we show favoritism? And how our actions might be construed that way. And I've never been on the receiving side of that conversation, but I can't imagine I would take hearing that very well. I think that would probably hurt a lot. But I think it's something that if our kids are feeling, we need to let them express and figure out how to deal with that. Any of y'all ever had your kids tell you that they think one of the others is a favorite in a way that hurts them? Marion and Gina are smiling. That's a smile of experience. Justin?
All the Bailey kids say that the other is the favorite, so
I was going to say, I've heard from all of them about who
Every
the
one of
favorite
them.
is or is not.
but I guess it's a good sign that they all think that the other is the favorite, which means that they're probably pretty equally dispersed. So
So yeah, another one of those sticky findings was the one that kind of really stood out to me. This idea of the importance of stepping into our kids' world. And I'm not going to necessarily rehash that because we already kind of talked about that. But this idea that part of what we need to be doing as parents is figuring out ways, even if it's things we don't really like, to interact with our kids on their terms. Did y'all read the example about the mom who didn't really like movies? Like, to me, that was like, man. I mean, the effort that is involved in that. And like, part of me is like, gracious, you really have to go to this much effort to connect with your kid? But then the other part of me is like, well, I would like to think that as a parent in that situation, I would do the same thing. Like, realizing you're not connecting with your kid. So, what do you do? But that example, really stood out to me about what it looks like to find ways to meet our kids on their terms. Let's see. Others. And then the other of these kind of sticky findings it is the idea that these sticky faith moments need to be both planned and spontaneous. So certainly we need to plan these times. Like, I think all of you know me well enough to know I am a planner. I do not do anything off the cuff. That is the most surefire way to ensure that you do not achieve what you are trying to achieve. Like, for me, spontaneous is hard. I know this is shocking to all of you. Like, so I think there's absolutely a need for planning. But the other thing I think that they were talking about that is true is we also need to be able to take advantage of these moments when they happen. That sometimes we can't plan all of these things. Or sometimes we're going to be doing something and a moment's going to present itself. And we have to be ready to take advantage of those moments, aware of when those kinds of opportunities can happen. And that requires, perhaps in many regards, even more diligence than planning. And more awareness than planning. Like, planning, it's going to happen. But to be able to see those things as they pop up and take advantage of them, well, that really requires a commitment on us as parents that kind of takes it a step further in that we are constantly watching for those opportunities. So,
Jared, can I say something?
Absolutely, Joy. Please do.
I think being aware of what's going on is really important, because that group of kids with, Chloe and Ethan and Faith and Gabby, anytime we were together doing something, I would be observing what's going on. And it's like, there was one time when we were at Green Valley Day Camp, and, there's always those teenagers that go off and doing what they're not supposed to do, hanging around each other. And the girls would miss their swim times hanging out with the boys, and the boy would miss his swim time because he wanted to hang out with the girl. And I'd pull the kids aside and I'd say something to them. It's like, didn't you see how much fun they missed in the pool? I mean, what'd you guys do in the pool? And they're like, oh, and they would tell me what was going on. It's like, they missed all that. You guys don't be so wrapped up in a boy or a girl. You're missing out on things. And I would tell the kids this, it's like, it's a teachable moment. And each one of them would open up and say stuff to me. It's like, yeah, they shouldn't be doing that. And they agreed with me. And Faith and Chloe and Gabby, they all still come up to me and ask me questions. And it's like, well, okay. And we would talk about it, And it's like, and you always be aware and point out stuff that what's going on around them, and pointing out, you really shouldn't be doing this, and see what they're missing. And it really helped because they still comment on it to me,
Yeah. And so I think this is exactly this thing of just being aware of what's going on. And you have to be watching for those things. In the book, it talks about creating margin. This idea of a space where they are willing to, like Joy was talking about, come up and talk to you, to share things when those spaces are there. But teenagers are weird. Sorry, y'all. I mean, all the rest of us have been there.
I'm agreeing with you, Jared.
I mean, we all look back on our own selves as teenagers and like, yeah, teenagers are weird. We were weird as teenagers. Like, it's not like y'all have somehow gotten progressively weirder. Teenagers are just weird and they're awkward. And so we got all these things and all these ideas, and we kind of acknowledge that they're important. But how do you actually do it? Lane, what makes you want to actually talk to your parents?
Maybe when I'm like when I'm in the mood.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to say it, but like if I'm like happy about something else or excited about something else, it'll kind of get my mind on the stuff, I need to tell my parents, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so, I think this is helpful for us to remember as parents. There are times where our kids will want to talk to us and are more willing to talk to us than others. And as parents, we need to be available in those moments. Because if they actually want to talk to us and we blow them off, what kind of message is that sending? And so it requires us as parents to, commit to these things. Phil, what makes you want to talk to your parents?
Let me think.
You think. Hope, what about you? When do you actually care to talk to your parents?
When I'm really happy about something, or if like something were to happen at school. Like,
okay. So seeing some of these same things. Our kids want to share exciting and good things that are happening in their lives. They may even want to talk to us when things aren't so great, when there are problems. But that also might be the time where they really don't want to talk to us. I think about myself as a teenager. And there were times where I probably should have talked to my parents, and they were absolutely the last people I wanted to talk to. What about you, Phil? You got something yet? It's okay if you don't.
same with what Hope said. Like if I'm really happy or if I'm learning something cool or exciting at school. And yeah, sometimes when I just don't want to talk to him, when I'm upset or something.
Yeah. And so I think all of this is reinforcing kind of these same ideas, that it requires effort and it requires us looking for these opportunities, because sometimes opportunities are going to be there and sometimes they're not. And that's part of what makes being a parent tough, right? Trying to help your kids and be there for them when they need you, but desperately do not want you. I mean, even at 6, there are times where it's like, Ben, you could make this so much easier on yourself if you were to just ask for help. But you are entirely too stubborn for that. I don't know wherever he could have gotten that from.
You have just described my life of my sister.
And so, it only gets worse as they get older. So, of all the ideas, were there ideas in the book that you thought might work for your family? Maybe something you hadn't thought of that you really liked that maybe you want to try?
I think the one that got me was when it asked your child, what would you like me to do differently? I never even thought of asking that. I mean, wow, I just never really thought about that. And when you're talking just now, it's like, I see myself like when I'm at school, I'm still in this school mode. School's over. I'm trying to wrap things up so I can go home, and my kids come bursting in my room and, Mom, guess what happened? And it's like, just a minute. And it's like, I got to stop doing that. I've got to turn off teacher mode quicker when they walk in that door, because I don't do that. And I need to. I didn't realize it till after reading this.
Yeah. I think we're all guilty of that. Like, hold on just a minute. And eventually those minutes stop needing to be held. And so, yeah. What else? What other ideas maybe that stuck out to you? I mean, to me, the most vivid one was the dad who makes any boy who wants to go out with his daughter go meet him for coffee. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about this one. Because to me, what really resonated was the question under that, like, are there less awkward and embarrassing ways to achieve this than this system? And I was like, oh, gracious, there have to be. Like, there surely have to be less embarrassing ways than this. But kudos to that guy for being invested in his daughter's lives. Others. Other ideas that maybe jumped out at you, or that you thought you could use in your own family?
One more thing. I didn't want to hog it up, Jared. I'm sorry.
You're fine, Joy.
We used to have family game night. We started doing it and kind of stopped doing it, getting busy. And I thought, So I asked my kids at dinner tonight, hey, what if we had family game night? What games would you want to play? Man, my kids just started naming off games. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we'll go back to doing that. It's what I was thinking to myself, is like, I guess I shouldn't have stopped. And
yeah,
I don't know. I just thought maybe they were too old for it. And no, they were naming off all the games they wanted to play. And it's like, okay, I guess we're going to start that again.
Yeah. And so, this kind of gets back to some of what we were talking about earlier about the earlier we can start these kinds of things, uh, the easier they are to maintain as habits. And so, yeah, I mean, I still love games. Like one of my favorite thing about holidays is when my whole family is together and the deck of rook cards come out. And like, that is one of my absolute favorite things. So yeah. Others, Julie, were you going to add something a minute ago?
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess being a person that likes to read, I kind of liked the one where the mom continued to always read the books first before her kids read it. Like right now, I don't really have to worry about that, but I think that's something to be mindful of as my kids get older, to where, and then you do have things you can talk about, just like that mom did. You can have it be educational, or I just kind of think that was a good idea too.
Yeah. And I mean, so in some ways, it's a way to help your kids deal with ideas as they're encountering them. In other ways, it's just a point of shared conversation. Like, hey, I really liked this section. I'd love to know what you thought about it. Like, and so, yeah. And I think they were, they shared the same thing. And I thought this was something that also stood out to me. Like, maybe for your kid, it's not books. But I mean, how many parents care to play the video games their kids play with them, or like or to listen to music or stuff
That one
their
did
kids
actually kind of stick with me because Rowan and I do like to play video games together.
excellent.
But I'm terrible at the ones that he's really good at. Like Mario is my level, like jumping things, and he can do these. And he's been dying for me to play Link and Zelda, and I physically I cannot operate those remotes. That I was like, I just got to keep trying at it because that's the one that he really wants me to learn. So
Yeah. So these are the kinds of things. Another one that I really liked. I really liked the family Bible verse kind of thing, and this is probably in some ways like the cheesy cliche thing. But to me, this is kind of a way to, as a family, commit to some core values, right? So, like the example they chose was a really great text in Romans chapter 12. And that text in Romans 12, I think does a really good job of kind of communicating some things and saying, like, as a family, this is who we are. I got one here somewhere. But yeah, so there in Romans 12, this idea that we're going to, as a family, be people who love in a way that's genuine, who abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good, being a family who loves one another, who try to serve the Lord, who try to rejoice in hope, who try to be patient when bad things happen, and to be people who are constant in prayer, who are trying to contribute to the needs of others and showing hospitality. Like that text, to me, those are things that we can say, this is who we as a family are. I was kind of thinking about this for like what I might choose. And to me, I would probably choose Micah chapter 6 and verse 8, which I think most of you know is my favorite verse in all of Scripture. But this idea that our family is going to be a family who love justice and who show kindness and who try to walk humbly with God. This Bible verse for your family isn't just like, oh, this is a great verse. Our family Bible verse is Philippians 4:13. Like, and if that's what you want your family Bible verse to be, fine. It's a good verse. It's ripped all kinds of out of context. At least put it in context. But hey, if that's what you want your family Bible verse to be, that's fine. I'm not trying to make any judgments here. all scripture is still inspired by God. But like, to me, I think this is an opportunity to communicate more than just a verse we like. But to say, as a family, this is something we are going to try to live out. That this is who we are as a family. You know, our businesses have mission statements. Our church has a mission statement. You know, our elders have said that we as a church are a group of people who exist to make and mature disciples and glorify God along the way. That like what we are about as a church and as a congregation and as a family and as the people of God is about growing the kingdom and growing as disciples. So if we've got all these things everywhere else, and so to me, it was kind of like a light bulb moment, like, well, yeah, duh. Why wouldn't I have something like this for my family? Something that kind of is a benchmark of what we try to be. So that was one that really kind of stood out to me. Anything else that stood out to you this week we hadn't talked about?
Well, these aren't the most fun things to talk about, but this is where we are at. Lane is a senior, but talking about his future spouse, dating, paying bills, preparing to be an adult. He's taking a personal finance class this semester, talking about tax forms and checking accounts and all that good stuff. And so
I still ain't letting Lane do my taxes.
No, you don't.
But he's definitely, we've been telling him, you know, the importance, you know, when dating and, you know, dating someone with the same faith and all this stuff. And that's just hard topics, you know, that's just tough stuff to do. And it's not necessarily fun. And he doesn't he doesn't enjoy talking about it. But
No.
that's really, I mean, but they brought it up in the book. So.
Yeah. But, you know, I think exactly to your point, April, though, like these are conversations that at some point we have to have with our kids because we turn them loose. You know, I'm not even there yet. And every time, y'all heard that Garth Brooks song, Send Them On Down the Line? It makes me cry every time. And I'm still a dozen years out from this point in my life. Like, you know, but there is a point where like our kids, you know, they're grown. I mean, Marion and Gina, y'all have been down this road. You've turned 3 of them out, and now you've got a living room full of grandkids. Like, but there comes a point where like this is a conversation we got to have. And so, yeah, I think it's important to be aware of the need for those conversations because there does come a point where they become urgent. Rather than just important.
Hey, Jared, it's also important, in April, good comments, but it's also important to create that environment where your kids feel safe talking to you. And I think at any point in time when our kids were teenagers, they would talk to either Gina or I one about anything. And if they didn't feel comfortable talking to me about it, they'd talk to their mother or vice versa. So I think you got to create those environments where the kid feels safe talking about those hard topics. And I think you do that. And, you know, some days are better than others. You know, today might not be a good day to bring it up, but tomorrow or Friday might be. So anyhow, you got to kind of pick and choose the right time to have some of those conversations. But it's very important to have them, but it's also important to have that environment where the teenager feels like, hey, I can talk to my folks about this.
And that starts long before they are teenagers. Anything else we hadn't really talked about tonight that maybe you wanted to talk about from this chapter? Well, y'all, I have enjoyed our time together tonight. I hope you have as well. It's always good to see y'all on Wednesday nights. Next week, we'll be in chapter 6, which is probably one of my absolute favorite things to talk about And I'm a little bummed that Robert's going to get to do it, and I had to talk about teenagers. We're going to talk next week about the importance of relationships with people who are not your parents in our congregation. And, that's something that I feel very, very deeply about. So chapter 6 next week, we'll be there and ready to roll next Wednesday night, 7:00. Y'all have a great week. We'll see you Sunday.
Bye.